I probably have yet to meet, but nice to see you. One thing I do have to apologize. I'm at the temple right now waiting for our flowers to be delivered. So if I step away for a moment, it might be because they're delivering the flowers right any moment. Um, so the topic here is Jodo Shinshu in the interfaith world. And I'm happy to see one of the participants is Reverend Todd Suchia from Minnesota. I've known his family for a long time. But one of the best interfaith panels that I saw was in, I think it was 2012 in Minnesota when they hosted the Eastern Buddhist League conference that we have once a year. And Todd at that time was working full time as a dentist. Now, after he retired, he became ordained in the Nishon Ganji as a Bisei minister. But anyhow, at the time he was a dentist. So he had this lineup of people from all these different faiths on this panel. And you know what they had in common? They were his patients. so that's the interfaith world that we live in, that the people we encounter every day in our jobs, going to school, a lot of us at my age, we're going to the hospital or the doctor's office all the time. So people we encounter, and then I know a lot of you probably have situations where your family is interfaith, that you have family members of different faiths as well.
You join me?
So the fact is we are in the interfaith world. We are in a world where we're surrounded with people who are of other faiths. So I just kind of wanted to talk from a Jodo Shinshu point of view, how we should conduct ourselves in this interfaith world that we live in. I think most of you signed on our Jodo Shinshu belonging to either Higashi or the Nishihon Ganji. But if I say a few things that people are not familiar with, if they're not familiar with Jodo Shinshu, you could put it in the chat and someone will answer your question or bring it up during the Q&A. But this presentation is meant for me to speak as a Jodo Shinshu person to other Jodo Shinshu followers about how we go about being in this interfaith world. So let me see if I get the share screen up. Oh, here it is, okay. Share. Okay, I can get this. Okay, so do you see my screen? Okay, but I can't get the gallery. There you go. Okay. Oh, I see. I gotta play around with my screen a little bit. Okay. Okay, so, okay, maybe. Yeah, let's see if this works. Okay, PowerPoint. Okay, there you go. So what I'm starting out with is a thing saying, don't be that guy. And some of you probably attended this event online, the Zoom session that the Institute of Buddhist Studies hosted. And it was a book launch for the book, Be the Refuge, which I highly recommend that book. If you haven't read it, go out and get it. And so the author of the book, Chensing Han, some of you might have seen her in the May We Gather ceremony that I think most of you already watched. She was one of the moderators or presenters along with Funia Xu. And so the two of those women, they're just so outstanding in doing their research on Asian American Buddhism. And so I really wanted to hear this book launch. And so as she was giving her talk, people were typing away in the Zoom chat, you know, along the side. And a lot of them were just saying hi to her because they know her, or they're saying hi to each other. And if you read the book, you know she's focusing on her interviews she did with young people, young adults who are affiliated with various Asian heritage temple. And the term Asian heritage temple usually means a temple that was founded by immigrants or immigrants' children or their children to carry on the heritage Buddhism from the country that they originally immigrated from, as opposed to like some of the Zen or meditation centers that were just created by American-born people with no ties, particular ties to. They might have an Asian sensei, a teacher, but the temple was founded in a different way than the Asian heritage temples. So most of you here, you belong to an Asian heritage temple. The Issei came over and started your temple, and they kept a lot of the traditions from Japan or wherever they had come from. But I think most of you on this call are from the Japanese American community. But she really did a wide net of people from all kinds of Asian backgrounds, from Southeast Asia, from like Taiwan, Korea, a whole bunch of different ethnicities. It's really interesting to read that. So those people in the Zoom chat are kind of talking to each other and identifying each other. And so most of the people for that Zoom were interested in her book, and some of the people were actually in her book. And but the thing is, the Buddhist Churches of America, since they were meeting on their virtual conference at that same time, they encouraged their delegates to tune in on this session. And I think for a lot of the people who tuned in on the session that weren't planning to go, but because it was part of the BCA annual meeting, I hope they enjoyed it. I hope they got a lot out of it. But one guy, and I should say that guy, one guy in the chat just was really annoying. He kept, I don't know if anyone noticed this, if you were there, that he kept, so as these young people are identifying the different temples they go to, of their heritage, he's telling all those young people, you should join the BCA. he just kept saying, you should check out the BCA. You should come to a BCA temple. Let me say this is. And so he actually came out and said, if you want to be saved by Amida, and I put Japanese in brackets because it seemed in his imagination, he can't imagine Amida as anything else but Japanese, that he's not aware that Amida Buddha is also in the pantheon, or what if you want to call it, of the other Asian heritage groups, even like Tibetans and stuff. They have Amitabha Buddha as part of their range of Buddhas that they pay homage to. So he actually went so far as to say, to be saved by Amida, you need to join BCA. And that's dismissive of all these other Buddhists. And I hear a phone call, but I felt dismissed. I felt he didn't say Jodo Shinshu, he didn't say Shinran's teachings. He said, I just got peek over. Oh, yeah, it's the flower guy, excuse me. Okay. For their crops. So as more people were becoming aware of conditional arising, there was less need to go to people to cast spells or people to predict the future or those kind of things. So I think Shinran's bringing this to the level of the common people was quite revolutionary for his time. And then I think it was a big help for the merchant class that later became very strong after Shinran's time, because it helped them deal with the idea of risk, the idea that we just have to roll with what comes along. Which is a very realistic attitude to have. One of the things I wanted to caution people of, and I used to fall in this myself, is I see this in a lot of literature about Jodo Shinshu. They said Shinran rejects magic and superstition, or they say Jodo Shinshu rejects magic and superstition. So they use those phrases magic and superstition, and what I kind of come to realize is from the scholars like Chen Xing Han, that those terms magic and superstition have been used, and I think still are being used by the Western Buddhists, what I call the white supremacist Buddhists, to put down the Asian heritage Buddhists. There's a lot of evidence even now that a lot of groups are doing this. And I think some of it is unintentional. They're not white supremacists. They're not consciously white supremacist, but like a lot of us, we grew up in school. When we learned world history, it really was European history. It was really about how Europe brought civilization and culture to the rest of the world. That Asia and Africa, every place else, were backward, wild savages, and it took the explorers to go out to these other areas of the world to bring them civilization and culture. But when we realized that's really not the story, that there was civilization culture throughout the world, going way, way, way back. But when you have that mindset that only the Western, the European civilization or that society was cultured, then it's easy to put down other ethnicities as being uncultured. And so a lot of the literature in Western Buddhism is about saying, oh, the Buddhism that the Asians brought over is magic and superstition. They will use that phrase that they're chanting, they're offering incense, all this stuff. It's just a bunch of magic and superstition. So this kind of phrasing has been kind of used against the Asian heritage Buddhists by, and so there's even on one of the Facebook groups about Asian heritage Buddhism, one person, you might have heard of Stephen Batchelor, but his group, I think they call themselves secular Buddhist. And this person wrote to them and said, you know, a lot of your promotional materials are putting down Asians. Do you know that? And they said, oh, no, we're sorry, sorry. But they try to rewrite it, but it still came out as sounding like, we don't do that stuff. They don't come out and say we don't do Asian stuff, but they just said, our Buddhism is free of cultural, um, uh, I guess you could say baggage or something. Our Buddhism is free of um, those ancient rituals and stuff that don't fit in the modern world or something. They still put out this literature that that a lot of Asian heritage groups find very offensive. So there's a lot of this thinking going on where magic and superstition are the phrases that are used to describe Asian heritage Buddhists. And if you think about Jodo Shinshu, if you think about an outsider looking at us, and I've seen this in a lot of Buddhist literature too, it looks like we're doing magic and superstition. They're saying, oh, they have this magic figure called the Mida, and they chant these magic formulas to have their wishes fulfilled. And so that's why I'm just saying the phrasing magic and superstition, be careful of using that. It's more precise to say what Shinran was doing is self-centered wishful thinking is what he was saying we should question ourselves for. So we can't criticize other groups for their customs and traditions. We don't know, you know, we are not wise enough to know what's really going on in their processes. But in our own minds, we can ask ourselves, am I doing this ritual because I'm thinking it's going to make my wishes come true, my selfish particular wishes come true. So that's the preciseness that I think we should keep in mind when we read Shinran's writing, is that are we engaging in things to make our self-centered wishes come true, and we're not being aware of the Buddhist teaching of conditional arising. So I think that's this distinction I wanted to make clear. If you do read a lot of people using Shinran's writing to put down other religions. So to keep in mind, that's not what he was trying to do. Another part of Shinran's teachings that get, I would say, kind of twisted is this three-vowel transition, which is means san gan tenyu. San is three, gan is the vowel, ten is to change, and yu is to enter. So it's this transition where he talks about the particular three vowels of the 48 vowels of Dharmarkata in the larger sutra. And he came up with a scheme called the three-vowel transition. Some of you, especially, you might have heard it, a lot of different ministers talk about this at different occasions. And so the first gate, called the necessary gate, the 19th vow, I'm just putting a summary calling it attachment to ethics. And so Shinran is kind of describing his own process, and then it's meant to be an individual self-examination. We all start out in religion in this gate, which he calls necessary, because um, ethics, there's this idea that we see things going on in the world that are kind of, we think are bad, or we think we did something bad, that ethics becomes a big concern, especially as a young adult, about what's good, what's bad for things. What is the right way we should be behaving in this world? So ethics is a necessary concern that we have. Um, but once somebody enters into religion, and that's, he calls that the true gate, um, because when you enter that gate, you think you found the truth, which in a sense, in one sense, it's right, but in another sense, it's still kind of limited. So he characterizes that, associates that with the 20th vow. And so the trouble with, you become very attached to religion. So in the first um, phase, attachment to ethics, you can get very self-righteous. And you probably know people that can get very picky about ethics, and especially telling you what ethical principles they don't think you're living up to. And then attachment to religion is a similar kind of attachment, where people get very pious and think that since they're practicing this religion, this makes them kind of able to look down on others who don't seem to be following the religion as practicing it as uh, intently as you are. So, but that's a necessary stage as well. To once we get into our teachings, we become initially very attached to the I always say going through the motions, or going thinking that this is a way to purify ourselves to become this more righteous person. But then the third gate, which is the Gugamon, the wide vow gate, um, is represented by the 18th vow, and the summary I put on is liberated together with all beings. This is one point where Jodo Shinshu is kind of different from other Buddhist groups. Those of you who talk to newcomers that come to your temple, I think is a big shock when they hear that in Jodo Shinshu we don't have individual uh, attainment of enlightenment, because true enlightenment, as we read in our sutras over and over, true enlightenment is when everyone is included in that enlightenment. That Dharmakara said, my enlightenment is not the true highest enlightenment unless all beings are included in that enlightenment. And so I think a lot of Americans like to think of individual achievement as being important, and not so much bringing everybody else along. And I think that's, our education system, the way we're brought up here, that we have this very competitive minds. The idea that I could achieve something and leave everybody else in the dust. In fact, I think there's a cartoon I saw with a bunch of Buddhist monks in a room, and one guy is saying he's coming into enlightenment, and he says, eat my dust, ladies. So it's that kind of that competitive spirit that has kind of entered Western Buddhism, I think, in particular. But Jodo Shinshu, as all of you already know, the true enlightenment is when all beings are enlightened together. Um, any other enlightenment is a lower level enlightenment. It's not the true ultimate enlightenment. So when we can realize that gate, the wide vow gate, the gate that includes all beings, that's the third stage that Shinran says that. So he's saying this is helpful for examining ourselves as individuals. My first introduction to Sangan Tenyu was Reverend Saito's article he wrote, where he talks about Helen Keller. He had just watched a TV show that had Patti Duke playing Anne Sullivan, and he saw Helen Keller going through these three stages. The first stage is that her parents just wanted her to be a good girl, just behave, and the second stage was Helen herself, just go through the motion, just learn to make your fingers do what the teacher tells you to do. But the third phase, which her teacher brought her to, is to be connected to all beings. So what Reverend Saito said was, up until that point, Helen was kind of isolated. She was kind of attached still in her little bubble. But once the teacher made that breakthrough of making her do the sign for water by dumping water on her, so that now she can communicate something that her real experience and communicate that to others. And now she can also receive communication as being part of other people's experience. So Reverend Saito said that's that wide vowel gate when Helen Keller suddenly is outside of her bubble and is connected through language to the other beings. And as you probably know, the life of Helen Keller, she went on to be quite a humanitarian, and encouraged a lot of people along the way. One presentation I have done is using the Spike Lee movie Malcolm X, and also I read the autobiography of Malcolm X as well, where he kind of goes through these phases. And if you've seen that movie, you could see that the first phase is when he's in prison. He has to confront the ethical nature of how his life had been up until then, and realize that he was being driven by this desire to be like the white guy, white man. And then the second stage is he becomes really into the Nation of Islam and really following their particular view of Islam teachings. But the wide vowel gate is where he goes to Mecca and realizes the teachings of Islam is not just this narrow thing for a special group to look down on other groups, but it really encompasses all beings. And people who would say Malcolm X went through this transition where he wasn't just fighting for the blacks in America, but he was concerned with the liberation of beings all over the world, no matter what their racial background was. So I use Malcolm X as a way to explain this. But in either case, Helen Keller or Malcolm X, it's an individual's religious journey. And Shinran says we have to examine ourselves that when we have been stuck in the first stage or stuck in the second stage, and you know, I go back and forth myself. I get stuck in those stages as well. But the thing I put at the bottom of the screen is the thing I wanted to emphasize, and that is these are not meant to be applied to any particular groups or sects. Unfortunately, I've heard people sometimes say, oh, those Theravada people, they use the word Hinayana, which I always say, don't use that word. It's very politically incorrect. They say those people from the Southeast Asian countries practice a very 19th vow kind of Buddhism, or they're saying all those people in Jodo practice the 20th vow kind of Buddhism. Those are very incorrect statements when you apply this scheme to other groups. It's really an individual journey of self-examination. It's not meant to be applied to particular groups. So I really want to make that point very clear, that Shinran didn't mean it as a critique of other Buddhists, but as looking back on his life and being grateful that he went through those stages and came out at the third stage, the wide vowel gate. Okay, so so that's the first point about Shinran, is that we should read his criticism as being ways to examine our own ego attachments, our wishful thinking for ourselves. Even our own Dharma practice can get mixed up in wanting things for ourselves. One of the things we want for ourselves, we want to feel superior, and that's not good. So we have to keep examining why we do things and how much of it is really tangled up in our ego attachments. And the other point I wanted to make was that do not quote Shinran or refer to Shinran to put down other Buddhist groups and other religions. Because I've heard complaints about this, that people say Jodo Shinshu people are kind of smug. They kind of talk like the guy that was doing the chat in Chensing Han's presentation. there's that air of being superior to other groups, and that's not a good thing to do. So that's not what Shinran would intend for us to do. We need to feel that identification with all beings, not to put ourselves up high and look down on the rest of them. So that's the first big point I wanted to make. And before I go on to the second point, we're going to do a little stretching and exercise, not too strenuous. Those of you who saw the Franz Metcalf presentation, I really liked that he said, okay, it's time to stretch. So that's what I'm doing here. So you can stay seated or you can stand up. I'm going to change my screen here and stand up. Okay. So one of the so I'm going to share with you some of the things we do in qigong class at our temple. So first we're going to do a simple breathing exercise. As you raise your arms, breathe in, and as you lower your arms, breathe out. Just raise your arms, then breathe out. Okay, and another nice one for stretching, if you've been sitting a long time, it's called Smile Under the Rainbow. And you put your arms above your head like a rainbow, and you just tilt your body from very gently from side to side. So it looks like this. Okay, and then the last one I'm going to do is a very simple cloud hands. Those of you in Tai Chi are familiar with move. It's a way to gently twist your body. So one hand is a little bit below your waist. The other hand is like in front of your face, facing the palm facing your face. And you turn one way, and then you switch hands and turn the other way. So just very gently twist. Okay. Oops, okay, so that's our little bit of stretching before I go on to the next point. Okay, and let's see. Okay, the next point is that to hear the nembutsu in other religions. And Kyoyo Shinsho, the great work of Shinran, which is mostly quotations, he takes quotes from all kinds of different sutras and even quotes some non-Buddhist texts. So he's really talking about what he learns from the larger sutra, that Hongan, this aspiration calls to us in the Nembutsu. And he finds in these other works that were written to have nothing to do with the Nembutsu in most of the cases, but Shinran is able to get that message out of those texts. It's kind of, some people criticize Shinran for doing that, but I think he's giving us his personal reaction to these other texts that though other people would say, oh, these are not Jodo Shinshu texts. He's saying, no, but I hear the Nembutsu in them. I hear the text in those texts talking about this calling to us of calling to us to come to the immeasurable light and light. So in Kyogo Shinsho and in his other works as well, he quotes a lot of different texts, not just Pure Land texts, to bring out that message. And he other teachers also in the Pure Land tradition, like the 7 Pure Land teachers that Shinran looks up to, and other sources, they also talk about the Nembutsu coming from different sources. So the Nembutsu is not just somebody in their mouth saying Namu Amida Butsu, but is how we hear things from different sources. And one of the most beautiful phrases I think is like Honen says, he hears the Nembutsus in the birds' callings, in the birds' songs. He hears the Nembutsu from the mountain. from the trees and the rocks. This idea that nature is always calling out the nembutsu to us. And I think those of you who take the time to just walk around and enjoy the flowers and the birds and stuff, you know what that means, that this call of Namami Dabutsu to let go of that centeredness, that graspingness, and kind of open your heart to the world around us. Nature does a very good job of calling that nembutsu to us. So, and then you could say the arts as well, the music and dance and artwork. There, you could hear that same calling to us to let go of our selfish, narrow-minded, uh, graspingness, and open up to a generous heart that receives and gives to other beings. So there's a lot of ways we could hear the nembutsu in other sources. But one example I wanted to give today is Shuichi Maeda. And he's the direct disciple of Haya Akigarasu, who is the disciple of Manshi Kiyozawa. And mostly you should know those two people, especially our temple members. Um, and so Manshi Kiyozawa and then also Akigarasu, his younger generation, they were the first people in Japan to actually encounter Western philosophy and religion. Japan was closed off for over 300 years, and from the rest of the world. So when Japan was opened up to the Western powers, um, Kiyozawa was one of the first to learn about these things, and then his students Akirasu and so so this is all kind of new stuff to them to all of a sudden come in contact with Western philosophy and religion. And both Kiyozawa and Akirasu have great writings about how they hear the Nembutsu teachings in reading those works from the West, coming from Europe primarily, in Christianity as well. But Maeda really takes it a step further. So Maeda, he's pretty much a 20th century man. And so he's already brought up hearing about Christianity, hearing about Western religion and philosophy in his upbringing in Japan. But he really wants to reference those texts in putting forth the Nembutsu. And I think a lot of you are familiar with Dr. Nobuo Haneda talks about his encounter with Maeda was a book that Maeda wrote about Faust, the famous Goethe play Faust that I think the title of the book is The Eternal Feminine. That book and One Truth Ocean are like my dream translation projects, but I don't know if I ever get to even entering any one of those. But that book, Dr. Nero said he picked it up in a bookstore because he was interested in learning more about that play by Goethe, but he ended up learning about Jodo Shinshu from that book because Maeda talks about how even someone like Goethe in Germany, he has no relation to Shinran or the Buddhist teachings, but in his writing, he really shows a lot of what the larger sutra teaches about um, uh, becoming one with the world and letting go of our attachments. So Maeda uses that play to bring out the Jodo Shinshu message. And he did a really good job because he got Dr. Neda to follow the path of Jodo Shinshu from that point on. He has a book called Face to Face with Shakyamuni, which Dr. Neda has translated the whole thing. And in our Chicago temple, we had read through the whole manuscript that we got from Dr. Neda. It's yet to be published, which is a shame because Maeda takes these verses from Suttanipatta, which is one of the oldest Buddhist texts. In fact, it may be the oldest Buddhist text. They're finding with archaeologists are finding scraps of it here and there. And he's finding in those verses the message of Jodo Shinshu. In his commentary, Maeda hears that Nembutsu coming out in these very early sayings of the Buddha. We had Galen Amstead sit in on one of our study sessions when we were reading this, and he thought, "Oh no, this Maeda guy, he twists everything around. That no one reads this tiny pata like that, you know." But in a way, Maeda's doing what Shinra is doing. He's hearing these unrelated texts, but finding the nembutsu in them. So it's a great work, and I know Dr. Netta, at least a couple of years ago, he mentioned he found someone to help him edit the book. So hopefully that book will be coming out soon, that translation that he did. But it's quite amazing that Maeda could get these early teachings of the Buddha and hear in them the Nembutsu teachings. One Truth Ocean, the Ishinkai, is like I said, it's one of my dream jobs for translation. He starts out talking about Shinran. The first chapter is Shinran. The second chapter is Dogen, the Zen master, what they call Soto Zen in Japan. And of course, those Shinran Dogen lived in they were contemporaries. And so a lot of people will point out that Dogen and Shinran, a lot of their teachings are very similar. And so Maeda hears the Nembutsu coming out of Dogen's writings. But then Maeda takes a leap backwards in time to China, to Lin Chi. You might know him as Rinzai, the Japanese pronunciation, and hearing the Nembutsu coming out of a whole different time and place, and talking about Nembutsu. And then the final chapter is he goes through the Bible and picks out these sayings of Jesus Christ, and hearing the Nembutsu coming out of them. It's quite amazing that Maeda will pick out certain phrases of Jesus and reject other phrases of Jesus. And there's a work called the Jesus Project. I saw it in the library where they actually ranked the sayings in the gospel of what Jesus likely said and what somebody put in later. So, you know, if some people think the Bible is the perfect work, a lot of scholars were saying not really. There are things that they think Jesus actually said, but some scholars think there's things that were added in coming out of his mouth that don't. Well, one of the things, they're inconsistent with the other things he said. And Maeda was sharp. He kind of pointed some of those same phrases out in his chapter on Jesus Christ. The things that he heard that Jesus, he really felt Jesus was speaking from his heart. And from those passages, Maeda really heard the Nembutsu teachings coming out. So in the next passage we're going to read, we're going to see kind of how Maeda talks about that. Okay, so this is from the book Evil Person. The first edition was published by North America District in 1989. Some of you may have that version with the gray cover. But the second edition, the Maeda Center put out in 2016, which is available most places. Okay, so we'll just read this. You can read this along with me. In my neighborhood, there's a Shinto shrine called, let me move my thing a little bit, called the Miwa Shrine. Every time I go to the train station, just talk about Nagano. Nagano. Every time I go to the train station, I walk past it. One evening, when I was passing there, I saw a follower of Nichiren, in a white robe. He was climbing the stairs toward the shrine. When he stood in front of the shrine, he started loudly chanting the Daimoku. Daimoku is a word for this phrase, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. I take refuge in the wonderful Lotus Sutra, striking a thin drum. When I saw this, I remembered that Shin Buddhist followers chant the Nembutsu when they visit the Ise Shinto shrine. The Daimoku does not seem to be hindered by anything. The Nembutsu seems to permeate the whole world. I think that is the true nature of the Daimoku or the Nembutsu. Oops. Okay, so the picture I show here is Nichiren followers are hitting that thin drum. It's called Uchiwa Daiko, because it's like a Uchiwa, the round fan that we dance with at Bonodori, but they hit it like a drum. So you can see the picture of the Nichiren followers hitting the Uchiwa Daiko. And so continuing the article, those Buddhists chant the Daimoku or the Nembutsu even when they visit a Christian church. Everyone in the world will be liberated by one truth. Christians will be liberated by the same truth. I know that every teaching of Jesus in the Bible is nothing other than the Nembutsu. Blessed are the poor in spirit is a good example of this. I see the Nembutsu everywhere in the Bible. Hence, it is not strange if a Nembutsu follower says the Nembutsu while reading the Bible or visiting a Christian church. Okay. So here, that idea of one truth comes out, that Maeda feels that um, all religions are going towards the one truth. I know a lot of people might disagree with this. I think you're all familiar with the blind man and the elephant story. And I think in a way that describes why we have different religions. We're all touching a different part of the one elephant, and that one elephant doesn't stay still either. That elephant moves around, gets bigger, gets old, whatever. But we're all trying to touch that one truth. And so one way for Jodo Shinshu people to not get too big-headed is to remind ourselves that we are um, we are in our limited way touching that truth, but other people as well are it's not truth unless it's one. I think that's kind of what Maeda is saying. There can only be one truth, and so all religions, if they're truly aiming to touch that same one truth. Okay, so as I come to the end here, in many towns and cities, there are interfaith groups that are doing programs and working together on particular issues like racial equality, environment, and a lot of them are looking for Buddhist participants. I remember this one neighborhood group, they wanted to do a program on ecology, on the environment, and they asked me to participate in one of their workshops. But for their opening panel, what is it, they as they advertised an interfaith panel, it was like one Catholic and like two Protestants from different denominations. And I told them that's not an interfaith, that's an inter-Christian dialogue, I said. And so they asked me to find someone to participate. So I asked them, one of the Muslim colleagues in our interfaith, local interfaith group to be on that panel. And he really thanked me. I think even in his talk, he thanked me. He said, since 9/11, Muslims have been having to defend themselves about terrorism. He said, it's so nice to be on a panel, not have to talk about terrorism, just talk about the Islamic view of the environment. So a lot of interfaith groups, they are looking for that, I guess you could say variety or diversity. So if you know of a group working on something, they're very happy to have Buddhist participants. I know a lot of you in your temples, you've invited guest speakers from different religions, but sometimes it's better to have more than just one person come, but a few people come from a different center. Um, and what's even better is if you go get a field trip going to their place. And I think one of the reasons I think is a guest speaker, one person can only give you a particular point of view. And normally if it's a minister or ordained person, it's very doctrinal. But if you talk to some of the more active members, you get a little more rounder picture of the religion, and also you get a more sense of the spectrum of the religion, how it includes a lot of different personalities. And as I said, the Muslims have been very active in interfaith dialogue, especially after 9/11. It's kind of sad that event made them really pick up the ball and become in the forefront of fostering understanding between the religions, because they've been so misunderstood. There's so much bad information out there, even in the mainstream media about the Islamic religion. So they've been very much active in organizing interfaith groups. And one of the great things is, as you probably know, Ramadan just finished. And one of the customs of Ramadan is that you have iftar dinners. And they've been told, I don't know, it's a custom in Muslim communities. Iftar is a time when you break the fast. You're fasting all day for several days in a row, but when the sun goes down, you can have this terrific feast. But since it's such a feast, why not share it with your neighbors? So it's kind of a custom for a lot of Muslim centers to invite people from other faiths to join them for these iftar dinners. And I've been to a couple of them, and you know, I've been invited to a few virtual ones lately, but I they're not as interesting because the main thing about iftar dinner is so good is the food. Because it's a feast after all day fasting. So you can imagine they put out the most tasty food at that time. But also, it's a chance to meet the different members. My husband Gary and I and somebody else from our temple, we were invited to one temple which is mostly Palestinian, but they let the young people plan it. And what they did is they had all these icebreakers and games. You know, they put everybody in small groups. It was a lot of fun. So it's nice when these different centers do plan these activities to bring people in to understand, get a better understanding of who they are and what they do. And also, they, like I said, they do sponsor a lot of conferences on interfaith dialogue because they it's important to um, uh, not just to get their message out to understand others, but they want to understand others as well. And I've been very happy to participate in some of those. And then just as you know, just like in Buddhism, there's very many types of Buddhism. In the Muslim community, there's many types of ways people follow the Muslim religion. They have their sects, they have their conservative groups, and their more progressive groups. So there's quite a range of different practices and presentations, just like in Buddhism. So you can't really solidly say, oh, the Muslims like this, or they all believe that. That's not really true. And um, one of the things I hear when I attended some events is just like the Buddhists, the English translations is what's screwing a lot of things up. They're saying a lot of the misunderstandings about Islam comes from bad English translations. So just like the Buddhists were still struggling with translating things in English, they're coming across that problem as well. So they've been trying to get more young people to study the Quran in Arabic so they can understand in that language what's really going on. Um, and so I was going to say, so I hope all of you have a chance to share with other religions. An easy question to ask other people is, you know, what days do you celebrate? What kind of food and decorations do you have? That's a nice icebreaker to learn about other religions. But you could try more serious topics. Um, how does your religion guide you in interacting with people? How do the teachings help you cope during difficult times? And also for each of you to think about, how would you answer those questions that people ask uh, you as a Jodo Shinshu follower? How does Jodo Shinshu guide you in your interactions? How does Jodo Shinshu help you through difficult times? So these are things you might want to discuss with your minister and your fellow members, especially in Higashi. We got the Dharma Seeds program going on. So this is something a lot of those people who participate in Dharma Seeds have been uh, being able to articulate. And as you probably know, for the older generations, the Issei and the Nisei, first and second Japanese American, a lot of them, they don't articulate what Buddhism is. And um, the ladies at our temple, they said when newcomers come, they run the other way because they said newcomers want to ask all these questions about Buddhism and we don't know what the answers are. Um, but I think in a lot of ways they show in their being what Buddhism is. And so, but in the interfaith world, we do need to think of ways to articulate our religion. The benefits of interfaith interactions, appreciating diversity of human beings, and also wisdom, how wisdom is expressed in different ways. But for me, the biggest benefit is understanding Jodo Shinshu. It really helped me to understand so much by hearing other religions' perspective. And also the idea of giving and receiving respect. It's so easy to say, oh, I don't like what they say. I don't go with what they're talking about. But really go back to Honen's 7 article pledge. How we're not experts. We don't really know what's going on in subjectively in those people's hearts and minds. So we just have to say, I don't understand. I have much to learn yet. So if we keep that humble attitude, that will help us in giving respect and hopefully receiving respect as well. And then keep in mind, Namu Amida Butsu will come to you from the 10 directions, from not just from Jodo Shinshu ministers, but from many, many, many kinds of teachers. And that's the last slide I got here. So what I would like to do is take a brief break, about 5 minutes. Let me stop my share. Okay. And